Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. For the past month or so I've been playing a bunch of Dragon Ball games, or more specifically Dragon Ball RPGs.
Alright Nappa, time to have some fun!
This idea came to me when I saw the newest Dragon Ball game, Sparkling Zero, get released. I wanted to start playing that game, but first I had a desire to play some older Dragon Ball games and maybe make a video about that.
I think I can handle this!
Since I love RPGs, I first wanted to check out if there are any Dragon Ball games described as such. Much to my surprise, I found a bunch of Dragon Ball games that were described as RPGs, which made me really curious. So I thought it would be really fun to try out all these RPGs and talk a little bit about them on the channel.
Listen up and listen good.
I'm going to tell you about my experience with all of these games and what Dragon Ball RPGs I like the most. So sit back, grab some drinks, and let me tell you about my experience with Dragon Ball RPGs. Hope you enjoy.
Who the hell are you?
The very first Dragon Ball game that was described as an RPG came out in 1988 on Famicom. It was called Daimyo Fakatsu, or Great Demon King's Revival, and it was exclusively released in Japan. There is a translation patch online, but I had no idea how to apply it in the emulator or if you're even able to do that. I had no luck with finding a full English version that will just work out of the box. So I tried playing the Japanese version because I really didn't want to skip the first Dragon Ball RPG. I got to record some footage for the video, but I didn't get very far in the game for obvious reasons. This is more like a board game where you use different cards in the battle, which are randomly generated. Speaking of which, the game will set up some ground rules for several Dragon Ball RPGs that came after it, especially when it comes to the card battle style of gameplay. In fact, the next 4 games will have the same idea for the core gameplay systems with little to no changes. Which brings us to Dragon Ball 3 Gokuden. This game also came out on the Famicom in 1989, only a year after the first Dragon Ball RPG. Just like the first Dragon Ball RPG, this game also came out only in Japan. I had a bit more luck with the fan translation for this one and I got it working. But the translation itself is not so great. I mean, it's enough for you to play the game and understand what's going on, for the most part. But you'll still have a lot of text that doesn't make a lot of sense, especially in combat. Putting that aside, I certainly had a bit more fun with this game, not only because of the English translation. This game looks very nice and much better than the first RPG in general. While the first RPG only allowed you to play with Goku, Dragon Ball 3 has 2 more playable characters, Krillin and Yamcha. You start the game as Goku again though, and the card-based gameplay is back. Not only for the combat, you even move by selecting different cards on the map. The first Dragon Ball RPG also had the same idea for movement on the map, but as you can see here, Dragon Ball 3 had some massive improvements when it comes to the visuals and the presentation. The points of interest are easily noticeable on the map, but you need to select an appropriate card for movement and do some light calculations. For example, if you need to make 4 steps to get to a certain block, you obviously need to select the card with 4 stars or the combination of other cards. I found the battle system a bit confusing at first, but it's actually pretty simple. Enemies will turn over the cards in turns, and if your next card has more stars than the opponent's card, you will deal damage. It also goes in reverse of course, and you can rearrange the order of your cards. You'll get these little cool animations of character attacks, which I found very charming. The next few games will only build upon what this game already established. In 1990, we got another very similar game called Dragon Ball Z Assault of the Saiyans, and I won't even try to pronounce the original name of this game. This game begins with the Saiyan saga, and it has even more playable characters than the last game. You start off as Goku and Piccolo right after Raditz kidnaps Gohan. The way you explore the map in this game is not so linear like in previous games, you definitely have more freedom of movement. It still has the same card gameplay mechanics in and out of combat, it's almost identical. The game didn't take a massive leap when it comes to the visuals, but it still looks pretty nice for such an old game. Although this game started getting annoying very fast because of the random encounters. I mean, even the previous game had random encounters, but it had a pretty linear exploration and progression, so it didn't bother me a lot. This one though is definitely more open-ended, which made me curious to explore the map, but I quickly lost that urge because of the constant interruptions. Sadly, this trend will continue in the next couple of games as well. TOS Software was on the roll with these games back in the day, and only a year after this one, we got another Dragon Ball RPG on Nintendo Entertainment System called Gekishin Frieza, or Dragon Ball Z2, A Fierce God Frieza. That's a long ass sentence. I really don't have a lot to say about this game because it's very similar to previous games, if not identical. The art style is a bit different though, mostly because of the color palette. However, the differences are almost negligible. This was the point where I started getting bored of this style of gameplay, to be honest, and I really hoped that the next game would bring something different to the table. Well, it did. Kinda. Dragon Ball Z Super Saiyan Densetsu came out in 1992 on Super Nintendo. Yeah, this RPG is 32 years old, just like your boy C4G. Oh my god. As you would expect, this game was only released in Japan, but it got an English fan translation that you can find on the internet, and that's the version that I've been playing. Not for very long though, because this game also had the same annoying random encounters that can totally ruin the experience for me. However, this game also introduced some new gameplay features, which made it feel quite a bit different compared to previous Dragon Ball RPGs. First of all, Super Saiyan Densetsu. First of all, Super Saiyan Densetsu look... God damn it. The translation for it is Super Saiyan Legend, so let's roll with that. First of all, Super Saiyan Legend looks pretty good for a 32-year-old game. The character sprites are not amazing, but you know exactly what DBZ character you're looking at, which is good enough. The environments you're exploring look pretty damn good for such an old game. But the best part about the visuals in this game are these little quote-unquote cutscenes, I guess, which play out when characters use special abilities. The game roughly follows the Saiyan, Namek and Frieza sagas. It starts when Raditz arrives on Earth. You take control of Goku, but you also have Piccolo in your party. Later on, you get to unlock more playable characters. Every DBZ fan won't have any problems with following the story, but I can see how someone who never watched this anime can get easily confused. If you're even considering playing games like this, you probably already watched this anime. I mean, come on, it's Dragon Ball Z. What I really like when it comes to the gameplay is the ability to fly. Exploring the ground level is similar like before, but now you can press the button and fly. It feels like you have a decent amount of freedom of movement on the map. Unfortunately, this is completely ruined by the random fight encounters. You can't explore the map for more than 10 seconds without triggering a random fight. It's so freaking tedious and game breaking for me personally, and I know a lot of people hate this as well. You could make an argument that random encounters complement the RPG progression in the game. I mean, after all, you need more XP to level up your characters, but these random encounters are just way too aggressive. I would probably be able to tolerate this if the rate of these encounters was much lower. As for the combat system, you should know how it works by now. The card battle system is back, with some minor differences. The number of stars on the Dragon Ball indicates the attack power, and the bottom right Dragon Ball shows you the defensive power. There's even an auto-attack feature, which makes the random encounters a little bit less tedious. I would only recommend this game to huge Dragon Ball fans, and if your tolerance level for random encounters is very high. I had some fun with it at first, but it quickly gets very annoying. To put it simply, if you only want to try out one of these old Dragon Ball RPGs with card-based systems, I would definitely recommend this one in particular. It looks like it took all the best features from previous games and added some new features on top of it. It also looks the best and it feels the best to play in general for multiple reasons, regardless of my personal problems with it. It's pretty much the only game that I would recommend trying out, well, so far at least. During the same year, we got another Dragon Ball RPG called A Violent Battle of Artificial Humans. I managed to find a proper translated version of this game, which made the experience much smoother in general. This game was supposed to be a sequel to A Fierce God Frieza, as it continues the story after Frieza's saga. It starts off with a battle against Frieza and Goku, and right after that you get to gather the Dragon Balls again so you can resurrect Goku. I took a little break before this game because I really started getting bored of the same gameplay loop, to be honest with you. That's probably why I had a bit more fun with this one, even though it's mostly the same game like before. Well, it's not exactly like the previous game, which I definitely enjoyed the most out of these old card battle RPGs. But the beginning is pretty interesting because you need to use the radar to find Dragon Balls and explore the map. I also thought the card gameplay system is probably the most interesting in this one. The majority of cards have some sort of a special effect which will be applied after you use it. They can also trigger this training session or something similar to that, or simply heal your characters. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but yeah, the annoying random encounters are back. But like I said, I took a little break before I started playing this game, so it didn't bother me that much as it would if I just played all of these games at once. The last Dragon Ball RPG that came out on Famicom was Plan to Eradicate the Saiyans in 1993. Once again, this game only came out in Japan, but you can find the English translation online, which I did. This is the first game that featured a completely different story, not derived from the manga or anime. It starts off with Mr. Popo, who speaks with Goku and Gohan about the mysterious machines that appeared all around the world. These machines are releasing some gas that will kill everything around it, and it also affects the power of all Z characters. I can see how some people can play this game only for the unique story in DBZ worlds. Everything else is pretty much the same. It's based off the card battle system from previous games with some minor differences. I didn't spend a lot of time playing this game, and I was really curious about the next two RPGs that we're going to mention. That's because we're finally stepping away from the old card-based gameplay systems. This will conclude the Gokuden Dragon Ball series, and not long after that we got Super Gokuden, which consists of two new games. Both of these new games were released on Super Nintendo. I was pretty excited to try them out because these games were described as action RPGs. Well, that's a bit of a stretch, but they are certainly different compared to previous games we covered. The first one was called Dragon Ball Z Super Goku Story Assault Arc, and it was released only in Japan, but there is a fan translation online. This game doesn't include the Dragon Ball Z arc, even though it has the Z in the title, it's just the original Dragon Ball story. It's kinda weird.
Thinking about it makes me sick to my stomach!
And that's exactly how it begins. You play as young Goku, who encounters Bulma in the beginning, and you go together on the adventure for Dragon Balls. I think this game looks pretty good in general. It has a very nice presentation. As for the gameplay, it's basically just a mini-game that requires you to press the button at the right time. Goku and all enemies have this flashing effect, which allows you to attack or defend. It's pretty simple and not so fun, to be honest. The dialogue has some options to choose, which is supposed to affect some events in the story. So what about the second game? Well, it was called Dragon Ball Z Super Goku Story Awakening Arc. As you would expect, it was only released in Japan on Super Nintendo, but it seems like it had an English fan translation, just like the majority of these games. The only reason I know that is because I checked out some gameplay videos on YouTube. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a working version of this game, no matter how hard I tried. According to Dragon Ball Wiki, it's very similar to the previous game, with some additional gameplay features. Overall, I think both of these games look much better compared to old Dragon Ball RPGs we covered. That's obviously because they released on a more powerful console, just like Super Saiyan Legends. To be honest, I quickly started getting bored of the card games because they all felt the same. I mean, I did have some fun with them, but the overall gameplay was not extremely interesting for me. But it's worth mentioning that I had no nostalgia for these games, so your opinion might be different if you played at least one of them back in the day. That being said, I was very excited to begin exploring an entirely different Dragon Ball RPG series called Legacy of Goku. Legacy of Goku is actually a trilogy. All three games came out on Game Boy Advance in the span of 3 years. The first Legacy of Goku game came out in 2002 and it had a very mediocre reception. I had no idea what to expect from these games, but I was very curious. I never had a Game Boy Advance and I'm pretty sure this is the first game on the system that I ever played. Well, not on the system itself, but through emulation of course. First of all, I think this game looks very nice. I was surprised how good it looks on a big screen with the emulator upscaling. The character sprites look very nice, as well as the environments. That being said, I was struggling a bit with the quote-unquote verticality of the terrain. You have a very limited flying system in this game, and only by flying you can reach some terrain on these levels, and far too often I just wasted the flying resource because I tried to fly into a solid wall. I mean, that's not a big deal because you can always get more flying items on the same place on the map, but that's not my point here. The game just doesn't have a good visual representation of the vertical terrain, and I thought this was just a hardware limitation of Game Boy Advance. However, the sequels will do a much better job with this. Legacy of Goku 2 and Boo's Fury have some breathtaking visuals, especially when they try to depict some vertical and distant terrain. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Fun fact, according to Wikipedia, Legacy of Goku was one of the first games to feature full motion video, predating the Game Boy Advance video. Anyway, the first Legacy of Goku game follows the story of Dragon Ball Z up until the destruction of planet Namek. So once again, we start the game at the beginning of the Saiyan saga, shortly before Raditz arrives on Earth. You play as Goku, who reunites with his friends on Master's Roshi Islands. You get a simple little quest to collect some dirty magazines for Roshi. This is where you get the feel of the gameplay a little bit. You can only move Goku in 4 different directions, and for the most part the controls in this game work pretty good, although some areas suffer a little bit from the lack of diagonal movement, and controlling Goku in those situations is a bit awkward. Instead of killing 100 humans like Raditz tells you to do, you will do the next best thing. Kill 100 wolves, snakes and crabs, of course. I mean, this is an RPG after all, and even though Goku is one of the strongest creatures in the universe, he is not stronger than traditional RPG tropes. Seriously though, this is a little bit dumb, but you have to start somewhere in an RPG, right? The action combat system is pretty simple in this game. You can use a melee attack or special character abilities. You have an energy bar, which automatically regenerates when you're not using your abilities. As you play the game, Goku will learn more special abilities that you can use in combat, which can be switched with the press of a button. You can also hold the ability to charge it, which does more damage, I assume. There are no health indicators on enemies, so you can't see the damage you do. That being said, the melee combat feels a bit stiff and awkward. I think the melee combat lacks a couple of basic mechanics that will make it more enjoyable, like stagger or stun, some visual effects, and maybe something that will enhance the sense of impact. Fortunately, the sequels will do a much better job on this field. The AI is easily exploitable, so you can move a little bit from the enemy and they'll just get stuck in one place, most of the time. But it's not like AI is bad, they can follow you religiously sometimes, and I'm pretty sure the game does some input reads, which feels a bit cheap. But you can use flying to easily create some distance. Some abilities are very strong, so it makes sense to try and kite the enemies and abuse the hell out of this rechargeable energy system. But I also like the combination of blinding the enemies and get some free melee hits in, which is how I beat Vegeta. The movement feels slower than it should be, but the flying speed is pretty good. Speaking of which, I have a love and hate relationship with this mechanic. It's very cool to be able to fly in the game, but the implementation of this system leaves a lot to be desired. You have a flying meter that can only be recharged by picking up items on specific places on the map. It's a very systematic design, which turns flying into an annoying gimmick. The game also requires you to be precise when you're trying to land, like annoyingly precise. And if you don't land exactly where the game wants you to, you get teleported back to your initial position. That's one of the things which I found very annoying in this game, because now you have to wait for the stupid flying item to respawn or go back and look for the item on other places on the map. Overall, I did like the game, but the RPG elements and the combat system were not that good. Fortunately, Legacy of Goku 2 will address all of these issues and much more than that. Legacy of Goku 2 came out in 2003 for Game Boy Advance. Unlike the first game, Legacy of Goku 2 got some very good reviews from critics and the fans. This really made me excited for the sequel because I thought even the first game was pretty fun, despite all of its issues. Let's start with the visuals. The sequel obviously had a very similar artistic style, but there are some minor differences. For example, if you compare the trees from the first game and the sequel, you'll see what I mean. This comes down to personal preference, but I think the sequel looks much better in general. Especially when it comes to areas where the game tries to depict some vertical terrain. There are plenty of these moments in the game and it's very impressive. I never had a problem with the vertical terrain like in the first game. The sequel drastically improved this, and I would even argue that this is the best part about the visuals in the game. It makes the artistic style way more pleasing than the first game, it's not even close. Now you can clearly see where you can move your character. Speaking of movement, now we can move our character in 8 different directions instead of 4. This is a massive difference and it feels so much better in and out of combat. But not only that, if you press the directional button 2 times in a row and hold it, your character will start sprinting. The game uses this mechanic in a clever way and it becomes mandatory in some situations. Although it's a bit clumsy to use since you need to press the button twice and hold it at the same time. It works okay, but it's not that precise because of the input methods. Like I said, the first game felt like a prototype of the sequel when you start comparing these basic mechanics. Moving around and hitting things in melee combat now feels a lot better in general, especially because you can approach the enemy from different angles. However, the hitboxes are still kinda weird. Even after a lot of hours of gameplay, I never felt like I got the full grasp of it. The melee combat now has some weight to it, which was much needed in the first game. Character sprites will bounce off a little bit upon being hit, which creates a nice sense of impact. It feels very good when you successfully combo a couple of melee hits at once, but the melee combat feels like a game of cat and mouse, for the most part. One of the biggest gameplay features in the sequel is the ability to play with different characters. You start playing the game as Future Trunks, which is like a tutorial, but you'll quickly switch to Gohan. And as you complete some main quests, you start unlocking more playable characters like Goku, Vegeta and Piccolo. You can easily switch them in the save stations, but after you push the story forward, some of them won't be available anymore. Speaking of character exclusive features, you will stumble upon some special locations which are exclusive to certain characters, and you also need to be strong enough to enter. It's pretty cool because these locations give you something to look forward to. The first time you find them, you probably won't be able to enter because of your level, so it creates this sense of mystery behind it. Anyway, the main difference between these playable characters is their special abilities. It's fun to experiment with their abilities, but I mostly focus on melee combat. Unlike the first game, your energy doesn't regenerate automatically. Now you need to pick up the consumable items from enemies or by destroying objects like rocks. This becomes crucial in boss fights, and every boss arena has at least a couple of these objects which can help you heal or recharge your energy. If your health is very low, there is a very high chance for a strong healing item to drop when you destroy these objects. Yeah, finding the perfectly prepared chicken dinner in this rock makes perfect sense. Why not? You will instantly consume these items when you pick them up, there is no need to open the inventory. I think that's great because the combat doesn't stop every few seconds because you have to open the inventory and heal. It also keeps you on your toes, especially in boss fights. The game is already pretty damn hard at times, and the way you heal makes it even harder. But I think it's a good kind of difficulty for the most part. And you can always grind some levels if you hit a brick wall, which I did against Android 20. He kept kicking my ass over and over again, so I had to grind a couple of more levels and come back. Leveling up automatically increases your stats, which obviously makes your character stronger in general. You can also find some consumable items which will increase some of your stats. Enemies will respawn immediately after you leave and enter the zone again, so it's easy to grind experience if you want. However, I'm not a huge fan of how enemies respawn in these games. It feels very artificial and gamey, but I can see why it's kinda necessary, especially when you crank up the difficulty of the game like this. I mean, it's not like you have to spend hours of grinding to keep up with the difficulty. You will only lack 1 or 2 levels sometimes, that's about it. Most playable characters have the ability to transform, which makes them way faster and stronger. Turning into a Super Saiyan makes the gameplay even better because of the movement speed and extra damage. You get this special bar that will recharge after a while, but the transformation mode also actively drains your energy. If you focus on melee hits a lot, this is going to be the most important ability in the game, and most characters can do it, so it's a no-brainer. While Legacy of Goku 2 introduced some great new mechanics, they also removed some of them as well. You can't actively fly anymore like you could in the first game. I know I complained a little bit about that mechanic in the first game, but I wanted to see it get improved, not removed. It certainly had its problems, but being able to actively fly on these maps is very fun, and it makes sense from the narrative perspective. Instead, the sequel will have these scripted little events which will automatically make your character fly to a predetermined location. I can see why they removed this feature because it would collide with some other mechanics like the transformation, but I still kinda miss it. On the other side, the sequel introduced a full-blown world map that you can explore by flying. It's not exactly the same like flying for the first game, but I really love this idea for the world map, it's really cool. It's like a pseudo 3D map and you have major locations that you can visit and progress through the story. There is not much to do here though, but still, it's pretty damn cool. The story of this game begins with Future Trunks and it covers Android Saga as well as the full Cell Saga. The presentation is also better than in the first game, making these dialogue interactions a bit more enjoyable, with better portrait pictures and a bit more detail overall. We also have to mention the amazing soundtrack that this game has. It creates such an amazing atmosphere, and one of my most favorite moments was the introduction of Vegeta. It's such an amazing soundtrack. Overall, Legacy of Goku 2 is one of my most favorite games out of all Dragon Ball RPGs, which made me really hyped for the sequel. Before we start talking about the last Legacy of Goku game, there was another Dragon Ball RPG that came out somewhere in between these games. It was basically a remake of Dragon Ball 3 Gokuden with improved graphics and sounds. Yeah, the card battle system is back, baby. Kill me now. First of all, I never heard about the WonderSwan color console before. It turns out there is a working emulator, but I'm pretty sure there is no English translation for this one. I tried it out just for shits and giggles, and it works exactly the same like the old game, with much better graphics and sound in general. So I guess if you really want to try out Dragon Ball 3, this would be the best version of the game, if you speak Japanese that is. Dragon Ball Z Boost Fury is the first game in the series with a different name. It's still a part of the Legacy of Goku series, and it came out in 2004. Once again, only a year after the previous game in the series, we got another Legacy of Goku game, and it was the last one. I had high hopes for Boost Fury because Legacy of Goku 2 was such a big improvement over the first game. Well, Boost Fury certainly has some great new gameplay features that I enjoyed, especially from the RPG side of things. But it also has a couple of pretty big problems with the gameplay, which prevents it from being the best game in the series. Let's start with the visuals. There is not much to say here because the game looks almost identical to Legacy of Goku 2, which is a good thing. Here's a fun little comparison. In the first Legacy of Goku game you go through the Snake Way, which looks like this. And here's how the Snake Way looks in Boost Fury. It's a very different approach to the artistic style. Call me crazy, but I think the controls in Boost Fury are even better than in the second game. The sequel uses the same control scheme, but it somehow feels even smoother to me, but I might be tripping. There is no need to waste time here and repeat myself because Boost Fury has identical mechanics to the second game. However, it also has some notable changes and brand new features that we should focus on here. As you probably noticed, I like to focus on melee combat in these games. The biggest new feature when it comes to combat has to be the ability to actively block enemy attacks. Now you can hold R button to block all incoming attacks or B and R to use the energy block. Come to think of it, this ability should have been in the game from the very beginning. I mean from the very beginning of the series. Although to be fair, I rarely found myself using it in fights, but like I mentioned before, I would rather have these mechanics in the game than not. It has its uses for sure, but I like to be a bit more aggressive in fights than to stand there and block. Once again, you get to play with multiple characters from Dragon Ball Z, starting with Goku himself. The tutorial for this game is pretty damn funny, because some characters will just casually break the fourth wall with dialogue like this. What is it with all these guys? They keep talking about the A button and health meters. It's like they think we're in a video game or something. Okay, dude. I usually find situations like this immersion breaking, but Legacy of Goku games are light-hearted and a bit silly, so who cares? Shortly after the Goku sequence, you start playing as Gohan. The story of this game picks up where Legacy of Goku 2 left. It follows the events of Majin Buu saga, and I think the game has a bit more laid-back atmosphere. I mean, the tension picks up after you start dealing with Majin Buu, but before that, Boost Fury makes you deal with more casual tasks around the world. Buu saga was definitely not my favorite part of Dragon Ball Z, so take that as you will. However, I think they did a great job with the presentation and the story. I really like playing as Vegeta in this game. He has some new and cool abilities to use, although I didn't focus that much on these abilities because of the way I leveled up these characters. Yeah, you heard that right, we finally have a bit more control with the leveling up system. Instead of automatically assigning these points as you level up, the sequel allows you to allocate these points however you want. I was a bit skeptical at first about this, and I thought it probably won't matter a lot in fights, but I was wrong. You can definitely feel your character getting stronger when you allocate points into one of the stats. Once again, I focused on melee combat, which drastically affected the effectiveness of my special abilities. In other words, it made them useless at higher levels. That's because I dumped the majority of my points into strength. I probably forgot to mention that Legacy of Goku 2 added damage numbers. Well, Boost Fury has these damage numbers as well, so it's pretty easy to keep up with the amount of damage you deal and how stronger you got after leveling up. This new addition to the leveling up system is one of the reasons why Boost Fury feels a bit more like an RPG, but it's not the only reason. We also have a proper itemization system in the game. Now you can equip your characters with various items that you can find or buy, and every enemy is dropping coins now. Now, those are some very nice additional features, which certainly makes the game feel more like an RPG. However, the gameplay in Boost Fury has some serious issues, like I said before. I talked about the difficulty of the second game and how hard it can be from time to time. Well, this game went in a totally different direction. It's very easy for the most part. Like way easier than the second game, which makes a lot of these gameplay systems irrelevant. I thought I was crazy and I started playing the second game again, only to realize that I was not crazy. Boost Fury is just not properly balanced. It's certainly a bit harder to balance the game out when you have more control over the leveling up process, but that's not an excuse. I was dumping my points into strength a lot, surprise surprise. And like I said, you can definitely feel the difference in fights, but it doesn't really matter because the game is piss easy. It's very hard for me to care about specific combat features if the game doesn't require you to use them. Even the boss fights were really disappointing because of this. To make things worse, the game has a lot of stupid gatekeeping where it forces you to have a high enough level to progress. While these doors were mostly used for optional content in Legacy of Goku 2, Boost Fury uses them in the worst way possible. I had to grind some levels in order to progress through the main story in Boost Fury, a lot more than in the previous game. Again, enemies will respawn straight away, so it's not that hard, but still, it was annoying. But hey, look, we finally have an actual in-game map. I don't see the reason why we didn't have a map in previous games. You can also scan everything with your scouter, which was kinda useless, but it's cool. Speaking of cool, the fusion mechanic was pretty cool to see for the first time in this series. The quote-unquote 3D map is back and it also has some improvements. Now you can fly up and down, which is not something that you could do in the previous game. But more importantly, you can stumble upon some events on the map where you usually get to kill some people or loot some stuff. The previous game desperately needed something like this, so I'm glad they tried to improve this aspect of the game as well. This is why you get the feeling like the second and the third game are open world games, which is pretty cool, even though it's not exactly true. That being said, I feel like this game didn't give you the same freedom of switching characters. Legacy of Goku 2 allows you to play with your favorite character in 90% of situations, while Boost Fury is definitely more limited when it comes to this. I mean, it has a legit reason for doing this from the story perspective, but that doesn't make it more fun. Overall, Boost Fury could have been the best game in the series, if not for those problems I mentioned. It was still a very enjoyable game, and it shows you the true potential of the series. It's the best RPG out of these three games for sure, but not the best game in general, if you ask me. That title belongs to the second game in the series. So, we are finally done with Legacy of Goku series. I had a lot of fun with these games in general, and I want to start watching those DBZ episodes again. That urge will only get stronger after I start playing some newer Dragon Ball games on this list. It seems like no matter how hard I try to move on from the card battle Dragon Ball RPGs, they just keep coming back stronger.
Enough of this nonsense.
In 2007 we got another one called Dragon Ball Z: The Distant Legend of Goku. It came out in Japan and in Europe for Nintendo DS. I know you're not going to believe me, but I did have some fun with this one. While the gameplay systems are almost identical to old Dragon Ball RPGs, this game had some slight differences. It has a great presentation and graphics in general, but I have to say that animations are a little bit stiff, even compared to some much older DB games. In this game, you get to choose a character and play through a specific segment of the story. There are some differences in combat and the world map, but if you played any older game in this series, you'll know exactly what to expect. For what it's worth, I would choose this game over the one on WonderSwan console any day of the week. But if I had to choose a turn-based Dragon Ball RPG to play, it would be the next game we're going to talk about here. The next game in Dragon Ball Universe that has the RPG tag was Attack of the Saiyans. Attack of the Saiyans came out in 2009 on Nintendo DS and it was a turn-based RPG. A turn-based RPG that I really like. You won't get to hear that sentence very often on this channel. I mean, I don't hate turn-based gameplay, I will just always prefer a more action-oriented gameplay in general. Anyway, I never played this game before I started working on this video, but if I had a Nintendo DS back in the day, I would probably play the shit out of it. It still has some annoying things I hate about JRPGs, like random encounters, but that doesn't matter a lot in this game. That's because everything else in the game is pretty damn fun. First of all, the game looks very good. I love the animations in combat, and the places you explore are very enjoyable for the eyes. This game has a great beginning as well, which does a great job with introducing all major features. You start playing as Krillin, Tien, and Yamcha. Master Roshi gives you the quest to find a crystal ball on the island and bring it back to him. This is a great little tutorial where you get to learn everything you need to know about the game. Exploring the map is pretty simple. Sometimes you have to destroy an object on the map with a key blast, and of course you're going to get interrupted by random encounters. Like I said before, I didn't mind it this time around since everything else about the game is very fun. Shortly after this, Krillin, Tien and Yamcha will go their separate ways. You will need to do their personal quests, which I found very fun. The combat is turn-based and it has some great and very satisfying visual effects. As for some special gameplay features, this game has something called a sparkling mode. There's a special gauge for all characters that will fill up after a while in combat, and it allows you to execute a special move. Well, moves to be more precise. You need to have at least 2 characters in the sparkling mode in order for this to work. It's pretty cool and very flashy. You can also time your defense when being attacked in order to reduce the incoming damage a lot. I love active abilities, so I think this was pretty fun as well. You will level up all characters and get ability points to invest in one of their attributes. There is an impressive amount of different enemies to fight, and it's a pretty long game in general. You can equip a couple of special items, and some of them will only activate in the beginning of the combat. Shortly after I started playing this game, I had to go on a little trip, but I installed an emulator on my phone and got this game to work with no issues. So I used that opportunity to boot up the game when I had some free time in between. It was pretty fun. I couldn't capture the footage on my phone that easily like on my PC, but anyway. Come to think of it, that's how the original game was meant to be played, on a portable device. To sum it up, it's a great turn-based RPG in Dragon Ball Universe. Highly recommended.
Alright. I better start fighting with everything I've got. If we lose, this whole universe is going to be torn to bits.
In 2014 we got the first Dragon Ball Xenoverse game. It came out on PC and 7th gen consoles. I heard about this game before, but I never even watched any gameplay videos about it, so I didn't know what to expect. I played on PC and I had zero technical issues. I ran it in 4K resolution with rock solid performance, but it's an older game, so that's to be expected even on a semi-modern PC. Xenoverse features an entirely new Dragon Ball story, but it still has the same old events from the anime. However, this time around, we can make and customize our own character. I had no idea this was the case, so I was pleasantly surprised and very curious how that's going to work. You can choose between 5 playable races: Human, Saiyans, Frieza, Namekian or Majin. The customization options for a character are not amazing, but it's good enough to create a unique looking character. I'm a basic bitch, so I went with the Earthlings. The story of Xenoverse is about time travel, and the player works in a unit called Time Patrol. Trunks is one of the major characters, who introduces you to the game. He gathers all Dragon Balls and uses them to get a strong ally on his side. That would be your character, which is kinda ironic, because your stats in the beginning are very low. As they should be in an RPG, but still, it kinda doesn't make sense. I found the premise of the story very interesting in this game, even though I'm not a huge fan of time travel stories. I think they're usually very cheap and lazy. But Xenoverse did it in a fun way, because you're supposed to prevent the history from changing. It was very interesting to see the alternative versions of these events from the anime in cutscenes and how characters react. For example, in the beginning, Raditz avoids being killed by Piccolo, and you need to join the fight to prevent this from happening.
3 against 1 and still this! What a pack of losers!
You can even befriend some bad guys from the story and team up to do their quest. It's very cool. There is a hub area in the game where you have a bunch of interactable NPCs. You have the main story and side quests, and the game also has a strong multiplayer aspect which I didn't explore that much. While I did like the premise of the story, the hub area, character customization and progression, the action itself is not that good. It lacks the sense of impact, or that oomph that you would expect for such powerful anime characters. Flying feels awful in this game, and the camera can be your worst enemy. The combat itself is not awful, but it's also not very good. The control scheme is kinda weird, but the biggest problem is how the game feels to play. I think you can find much better fighting games out there, even in the same universe, so I wouldn't exactly bother with this one. That being said, I can see how someone who likes multiplayer aspects of the game could find it enjoyable. During my first impressions of this game, the only thing I could think about is the sequel, and if it's going to improve these interesting concepts. Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 came out 2 years after the first game on PC and 8th gen consoles. I can tell you straight away that I like this game a lot more than the first game. It has the same concept for the story and the gameplay in general. It's almost the exact same game, but it looks, and more importantly plays, a lot better. Once again, it starts with Trunks giving you the Time Patrol speech. Then the game cuts to an amazing looking cutscene with Frieza. This game has a bit slower introduction with more basic tutorials. I could tell straight away that I'm going to like it a bit more since the control scheme is noticeably improved in and out of combat. The story has some great moments, and I like how they included your character from the first game in the story of Xenoverse 2. Yeah, you can transfer your saves from the first game, which is very cool. Even though I didn't complete the first game with that character, it was still very cool to see him in the story of the second game. Just like in the first game, you have basic attacks, dodge, guard, and special attacks. You need to power up in order to use the special attacks, and you can also miss them if you're not careful. Your basic melee attacks will charge up your ki energy, which you use for special attacks. You get a handful of these special attacks in the beginning, but you can unlock more as you play, or buy them to be more precise. And much more than that, the game has pretty cool customization options. There are different vendors who will send you stuff for zennies or another form of currency that you get while playing the game. Leveling up is also a thing, and you get to choose where to invest attribute points. This hub area is much bigger and more interesting now. There are a couple of instanced areas here where you can meet various characters from the story, do some side content and so on. Like I said, I like the action combat in this game a lot more than in the first game. Although I have to say that I'm definitely not a target audience for this game. Xenoverse 2 has a lot of multiplayer options within the hub area, and Dragon Ball fans who enjoy this kind of content probably have a ton of fun with this game. Although nothing is stopping you from playing Xenoverse as a single player game and just go through the story, which I did. I enjoyed my time with this game and I can see myself getting back to it in the future. But here's the thing, I made one big mistake before I started playing Xenoverse games. I thought that Dragon Ball Z Kakarot came out before these games, so I played that one first. And after playing that game, it was very hard to properly enjoy Xenoverse games, because Kakarot has much superior gameplay in my opinion, and I can't wait to talk about it, so let's do it. Dragon Ball Z Kakarot came out in 2020. This game released on PC and all 8th gen consoles, but it also got a free next gen update for PS5 and Xbox Series S and X. I played it on my PS5 and it looks and plays very well on the performance mode. Speaking of the visuals, let's start from there. I think the game looks very good in general, even though the color palette is a bit oversaturated. I can see why some people might not prefer this look, because it's not exactly like the anime, it's way more bright in general. However, I freaking love how the game looks. Putting aside the saturation, I think the game nailed all the visual effects in and out of combat. The game has a lot of cutscenes which mimic the original anime series, and I think they did a great job with this. I mean, it's been a while since I watched all of these episodes, so my memory is a bit clouded, but I still remember all the major events. Even though I know exactly what happens, I was glued to my seat during these cutscenes and I didn't skip any of them. The voice actors are amazing as well, and the same can be said about the sound effects.
What a shame. I didn't think him foolish enough to turn against me, let alone attempt to steal the Dragon Balls for himself.
Got a gun!
Put all of that combined and you get an amazing presentation in the game. Like with the majority of these games, I didn't know what to expect from the gameplay in Kakarot. I knew it has some fighting game elements, but I also knew that it was described as a story-driven RPG. Well, I can tell you straight away that this is my most favorite Dragon Ball game in general, by far. I think it's much better than both Xenoverse games, although that's probably not the best comparison. I mean, Xenoverse games had a different design philosophy for the gameplay systems, and they're only similar when it comes to the fighting elements. Anyway, Kakarot starts like 80% of the games we covered in this video, with Raditz arriving on Earth. Actually, that's a lie, that's how the story begins. The game throws you straight into action as Goku, and you do a little sparring match with Piccolo. Unlike in Xenoverse 1, I did enjoy the very first fight in the game because the controls are very good. They are very snappy and easy to learn because the control scheme is very intuitive. Come to think of it, it's not that different compared to Xenoverse, but the action itself is way better compared to those games. For example, flying around in Kakarot feels amazing, which was not the case in Xenoverse games. After the fight with Piccolo, Goku and Gohan will go fishing and you learn some more gameplay features in this short tutorial. After that, the story of Dragon Ball Z Kakarot religiously follows the story from the anime. You will play as many different characters throughout the story like Goku, Piccolo, Gohan, Vegeta and more. Reliving these iconic moments from the anime was awesome from the story and gameplay perspective. The most important scenes and dialogue are fully voice acted, while some other scenes are not, but it's not a big deal. The gameplay in Kakarot only gets better and better. I played on the hard difficulty and I really like the challenge this game provides in big fights. Most big battles have a couple of phases or even a couple of fights, and the last one is usually pretty tough. I was getting my ass kicked a lot in some of these fights, but you can make things much easier for yourself in a couple of different ways. I started a lot of these fights with low health with no healing items, which make them a lot harder. Kakarot gives you the option to prepare food and get some bonuses, rest at a campsite and recover health, or try to level up by doing side content and fight NPCs. I think the challenge in this game is totally fair. Enemies will save up the most powerful attacks for later when you drop their health to a certain percentage. Then they start using some very powerful and flashy abilities, and these abilities have a great presentation. The game will usually change your camera perspective in these situations, which adds an interesting twist to these fights. It really adds tension to these fights, especially the first time you experience them. Even the basic attacks in this game feel very good. There is quite a bit of skill played involved in combat. You have to learn when to dodge, block or parry, because enemies will have a special rage phase when it's not worth doing some of these abilities. I never felt like the game is not fair. Your special moves require energy which you need to regenerate when you get a chance. Like I said before, you can make these fights a lot easier for yourself, especially if you stack some healing items in your inventory. Come to think of it, it makes the fights a lot easier. All missions have recommended level requirements as well. If you're struggling against some enemy, all you need to do is level up at least once and you'll feel much stronger in the fight. It's a huge difference. Each character has predetermined special abilities, but you have the option to customize them a little bit. You will also have different characters in your party and you can even use their special abilities. It's very cool, not to mention very useful in fights. You can level up all characters and you even have a skill tree. I was very excited for the skill tree, but this character progression feels very linear. There is not much room for special character builds here. You need to collect enough special orbs to unlock these skills, and talents also have specific story requirements. The orbs are gathered all over the map and you get them from defeating enemies. Collecting the orbs on the map is a bit mindless, but it's like a fun minigame you do along the way. That's not the only layer of progression in the game though. Kakarot introduces an interesting and unique layer of progression called soul emblems. Each major character has a soul emblem that you get as you play the game. Some of these characters are leaders, which allow you to put other soul emblems in their specific little skill tree. This will allow you to get various passive effects in and out of combat. It's like a small minigame. The effects on the gameplay doesn't seem huge, but if you want to optimize your characters, you definitely want to play around with this system. The map has a lot of destructible objects, as it should in a Dragon Ball game. You can destroy a lot of things on the map, and it feels amazing. Xenoverse 2 had some destructible objects, but it was nowhere close to this. Speaking of which, Kakarot has a lot of different maps to explore, and the more you progress through the story, the more maps you unlock. These maps are not huge by any means, but they're not small either. You will encounter various characters from DBZ while you explore these maps, and you can do some side quests for them. There are other activities you can do on the map as well, and it's just enough to keep the exploration interesting. However, I kinda hate how the game constantly pushes you to do the main quest. It can be a bit annoying.
Crushing that cloud is my top priority right now. Not this way, huh?
I mean, it's not a huge issue, because Kakarot also has a thing called intermissions. Intermission is a period of peace between the sagas, and you can do whatever you want in these segments. Collect materials, level up, explore the map, do side content, and so on. Outside of intermissions, the game expects you to follow the main quest in a very linear fashion. That's not an issue, but I only wish the game was a bit more open, even outside of intermissions. Listen, we could talk a lot more about Kakarot, because it's a pretty big game. A game I will continue playing a lot after I'm done with this video. It's hands down my most favorite Dragon Ball RPG.
You heard the big guy.
If I would have to pick the best 3 RPGs, I would go with Boost Fury at number 3, Legacy of Goku 2 at number 2, and Kakarot at number 1. And if I would have to extend that list to top 5, Xenoverse 2 would be the number 4, and Attack of the Saiyans would be my number 5. And that would be it for this video. Sorry it took a while, but as you could see, there are plenty of Dragon Ball games that are described as RPGs.
Enough of this nonsense.
Anyway, tell me about your experience with Dragon Ball RPGs. Which one was your favorite? Leave a comment down below. I still didn't play Sparkling Zero, but I definitely will after I'm done with Kakarot. It's not described as an RPG, but that doesn't matter, it looks amazing. Anyway, make sure you subscribe if you like my content. And if you're truly feeling generous, you can always become a YouTube member or a Patreon. Massive thanks to all my current supporters, and I'll see you in the next one.